It's the Craggy Rugby podcast. It's the 2021-22 pre-season edition. And I've got a gaggle of Craggy Crew members here for this pre-season. I'm going to just drag them in as we go. As I look at the fixture list, could be a very tough start to the season. We'll start with a regular, William Davis. Looks like we're going to be in for a tough season this season. What are your expectations?
Not very high, Alan. I think this is going to be a real challenge for Connacht. I think last season an 8-8 record in 16 probably reflected about where they were. They're going to have to win at least 12 games to be competitive. But a third of the games are going to be interprovincials. That's an Achilles heel for them, which they'll have to overcome. I don't think they'll win as many away games as they did last season, which was a good achievement, slightly obscure one maybe for them to win so many away games, and they'll have to improve their home form. And the start is absolutely key. If you're chasing after your first 5 games, and that applies to any team, you're on the back. You're going to be on the back foot. You've got to get ahead of it for those first 5 weekends.
You sure do. Niall Packy Shield has joined us for this evening. He might have to drop off in a few minutes. I know some people are going to be dropping in and out, so bear with us, folks. What are your thoughts, Niall? And who should we be looking out for? Are there any players we should be looking out for this season?
Well, we didn't need our new signings. This Leave Fifita, I've seen him knocking around. He's a massive human being. It's badly needed, because we saw in the preseason game how badly beaten up we were. We really need to meet these beefier fellas. Without Quinn Roux, we've lost a good bit of that. So him, I actually think I'd like to see a little bit of Sam Illo. I think he's a exceptional prospect, and I think we'll see him play a game or two, and I think he'll surprise a couple of people, and we could end up seeing a lot more of him than we think we would at this stage. So they're 2 for me. Yeah.
Excellent. And your thoughts on are we going to be? Is it going to be as tough as William says?
Oh, absolutely. So I think this is going to be a very difficult season. And I'm not sure how I think it'll go either. Right. I think somewhere similar to last season will be. I think that'd be a result, actually.
And we also have Lindy Mckenzie from the Galway Advertiser joining us. What are your expectations for the season?
I probably concur with both William and Niall. Certainly the start is really important, as William says. And the other thing I think is if we want to go anywhere, we have to nail those home matches. I'm delighted that we have. Noam has mentioned Eva Fifita coming in, and he's a massive bloke. I think Abraham Papali'i is another one who, after a tricky first year here last season, those 2 players are going to have the potential to be able to mix it up with some of the bigger boys, and we're certainly going to need them. Particularly against the South Africans and coming back into Europe again. I'm also interested to see, I suppose, the development of some of those younger players, the Peter Sullivans and the Sean Mastersons, the Niall Murrays, the Murrays, the Ken Prendergasts, because they're going to be another year developed from where they started, and they've certainly shown a huge lot of potential. And similarly, I'm delighted to see that Tom Farrell has returned.
Oh, of course, yes. One of the guys that I used to get a lot of slagging about having a man crush on would be someone like Tom Farrell, and hopefully he will bring us something in the backline that seemed to be missing last year. Another of the Craggy Crew joining us today is Dave Finn. Dave, how are you? How's your summer been, and what have you got to try and lighten the load that maybe give us a bit more positivity than we've got so far on from our experts?
I mean, from my perspective, rugby hasn't happened. There's been virtually no rugby apart from the under-20s for the summer. I'm going to put in a suggestion that I haven't heard yet, but based on that Lions tour, is I think the South African teams may have sold us a pup, because I've never seen a team. They're as bad as the Italians are without their internationals. Now, if their internationals show up, then we're in for dogfight. It's going to be horrendous. And I don't necessarily think it's going to be the greatest rugby we're ever going to see. They're going to be dogfights. And I do agree with the guys. Have we got are we a team that's set up to deal with that level of forward intensity? Because we struggle against English teams. We struggle against London Irish in a pre-season friendly up front. So how are we going to cope with the South Africans when they come with points on the table? But I do think that what was completely missed in that was how much the teams dropped off without their internationals. I'm more optimistic. I think there's a fundamental, what the one caveat I have on the whole of the season is, it is theoretically possible to finish 13th and end up in the Champions Cup, and I think that's problematic. I think that's seriously problematic. I think all the problems about on the pitch the guys have dealt with, and I can't fundamentally disagree with them. Though I am much more optimistic in terms of the players. I think the more interesting thing for Connacht is the coaches. What are the new coaches going to bring? Dave Senecal is going to be a hugely important figure this year because he is new. We know what Mossy can do. We know what Collie Tucker can do. We know what Pete can do. We've seen them in action. We know what their teams can do. Certainly
can I bring in, because I know Niall has to drop off pretty soon. Niall, you know a bit more about these lads, the coaching side of things. Can you give us a bit more background to them and what you think they might bring to the setup?
I'm really impressed with both of them. I think they're I think possibly Collie Tucker is more of a deep thinker about the game. He's I think he's excellent. I like the way he set up the under-20 forward pack. He likes a bit of dynamism in play. He's from what I can tell about him, he likes the no talent things. He likes you to have them perfect. So
do you think the fact that Collie's been involved, as you mentioned, with the 20s, that we seem to be attracting more of guys from other provinces who seem to have taken an interest in coming to Connacht to further their career? Is that part of it?
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, the academy uptake is really small. Leinster are the only province to have a full academy uptake for whatever reason. I don't know. It's possibly correct, Alan. I couldn't answer it for sure, to be honest with you. But I've a serious amount of time for both of the guys.
Okay, it's going to be a tough start, William.
I think it's a very tough start. They've relayed the pitch. Di Young's made a big difference there. He basically told them they weren't fit enough, and he has driven them apparently very, very hard. He was apparently quite brutal, and some of the players that have been let go might have been let go because they simply weren't getting fit enough for his standards. And they're talking about playing a very fast game. They want to use the artificial pitch. They know it's an advantage for them. Connacht struggle against those Welsh sides that play like that. The Ospreys in Cardiff are often, whereas we sometimes do better against the likes of the Dragons and the Scarlets. And we have the Dragons coming in week 3, and they're talking a very good game. Now, the view in Wales is maybe a little less talking and a bit more action is what they need. But that just boils into this for Connacht. They have to hit the ground running, and they haven't done so. They can talk about the 2 warm-up games, and I know that there were 37 or 38 people popped on for London Irish. It's impossible to keep track of who was who, but they still were losing the contact area, and they were caught the midfield defence, players running from first and second phase. And that's what Cardiff will do. Ray Lilo is a past master at that, and it'll be no different next Friday night. I'm just looking forward to the fact that I'm actually going over to Cardiff to watch a game live, out of Ireland, getting on a plane, which is very, very exciting just to do that. But
well, it's well for some. It's well for some. Lindy, are you worried about the fact that I look at the fixture list that four of the first 6 games that Connacht play are at home? It's kind of slightly lopsided, and then as you go on, they play. Then in January they play 3 home games in the URC, and they'll have another one. So in January they'll have 4 home games, which means we'll have very few home games from February onwards. Are you slightly worried that that's a somewhat lopsided fixture list?
No, not at all. It's just the way the fixtures are. That they know it now. They've known when fixtures came out. They just have to deal with it. Everyone has their own little issues to deal with when it comes to fixtures. So no, it gives them an opportunity to possibly, when they had those fixtures at home, to actually take advantage and get a good run of wins, which they may need at that stage to give them more confidence going forward. And so, no, I don't. I think it's just the way the cookie crumbles, basically.
All right. Okay. Good. Good.
I would have to come in there and say I think the fixture list is a shambles. That's the worst fixture list that any team has been handed. Where 7 of your first 11 are at home. Nobody else has been asked to do that. I think for fans, I think there's a potential chance for a huge disengagement with fans. Once you get in there, they're going to play a game in March and a game at the middle end of May at home. There'll be a European game in there, fingers crossed. If you got to keep people engaged, you've got to keep them coming to the sports ground. And you've just spaced this out. And I've looked at the other fixture lists, and nobody. It's the excuse was given. It's because of the South African teams and the fact that they have issues. And it was said yesterday on the URC press conference that games in South Africa may be moved to an undisclosed destination at some stage due to COVID, which I've heard is Dubai, because they're still very concerned about this. But I think Connacht got the short straw there. I accept what Lindy's saying about you've got to get on with it. It's not an excuse, but I'm more concerned from the fans' perspective that the season sort of just telescopes together and then just spreads out weirdly when maybe conditions are going to be a bit easier, and they might actually be aiming to get full crowds in sort of around March, April time. It's Connacht are just told, listen, get on with it. We're not interested. We've had enough. We saw that last weekend with the women.
I was about to bring that in. Part of this preseason, like we're a bit late for various reasons with our preseason podcast, and so we've missed out on the women's interpros, which is slapping a hand for me because I didn't get this organised in time. So apologise to all our Connacht women followers and rugby followers. But yeah, last weekend was an absolute and utter shambles, and it's incredible to see a representative team treated like that. I find it mind blowing. I was delighted to see the likes of Paul Boyle and we'll hear from let's actually hear what both Paul Boyle and Gary Ringrose had to say at the press conference at the launch yesterday.
It's obviously pretty ridiculous, and there was clearly a massive mix, but I can't imagine it be a mistake that'll ever or shouldn't ever be made again. So yeah, I don't really know the ins and outs of it other than it was a massive mistake and one that shouldn't have happened, but I've no doubt, as I said, it won't happen again.
This wasn't an ideal scenario, and we spoke about it ourselves in the change room that we wouldn't put up for it, and it's not good enough. I suppose from a bigger level, the apology has been made. Hopefully it won't happen again. Hopefully there's dressing rooms available and the COVID stuff goes away, but if a scenario like that was to happen again, hopefully the powers that be make the right decision and don't have the guys there. Whenever there's a Connacht women's game on, we go and support them. But yeah, 100%. I think the game is growing. There's huge support behind it. I was watching the women's game against Spain there on Monday, and it was a really enjoyable game. The women's game is only getting bigger, so I think the more support it gets, the better.
Okay, Linley, do you think it's something that the men could do more of?
I think everyone should stand up and stick up for them. Actually, whether you're male or female, you know, and you know, all the people in the top branches should, you know, the branch officers should stick up for them. Look, I think, interestingly enough, I think that this was possibly an example of when the game isn't professional. In the sense that, you know, of course it wouldn't happen to them. Of course it wouldn't happen to the males, probably, but we don't know that. But assuming that it was moved to Energia Park, probably shouldn't have been played there. There's plenty of other stadia that it could have been. And really and truly, let's say, you know, the IRFU should have had somebody there to make sure before this game took place that everything was in order. These are semi-professional and professional players in everything but being paid, you know, and to treat them like that is, you know, it's so demeaning, and I can understand why there's a lot of frustration. Now, I hope this is just maybe the result of this will be that hopefully such a thing would never happen again. But it's just an unprofessional attitude. When we talk about professionalism, but this is just an unprofessional way to treat to treat players. And, you know, I don't know where else, you know, I've never seen the likes of it before, you know. I'm sure maybe it's happened in the past a long time ago, but, you know, I think it's a real learning curve. And I think I'm delighted that most people have accepted that this was shocking treatment. And, you know, I would imagine now that, you know, it won't, I would sincerely hope it won't happen again.
And no, of course, it came on the back of the Irish women losing their World Cup qualifier to Spain, which has put a really huge spotlight on the women's game in the country as to what's happening, and are there deep-rooted issues there that need to be sorted out? What are your thoughts, Dave?
I'm going to come at this from a very slightly different angle. I have a deep suspicion, and it ties in with a little bit what Lindy said about the lack of professionalism. I have a horrible suspicion that whilst the world has been focusing on the fact it was women players, I'm slightly more concerned that it was Connacht women players. And the reason for that is there is still an attitude amongst some of the rugby fraternity in the eastern half of this country regarding Connacht that we are basically a bunch of lads up from the sticks. And I'm not saying that there wasn't an element of sexism in this. I think there was an element of sexism in this, but I also think there was an element of dismissal of Connacht in this as well. And I think that shouldn't be lost in all of this, because yes, I very much doubt the senior women's team will ever be treated like this again. Simply put, if you're going to have matches in one venue at one time going forward, looking at next year 22 and onwards, you should put them in stadiums with 4 changing rooms. If it had been in the Aviva, even if it had been in the RDS or somewhere else, or even this high performance centre in Abbottstown, they would have had dressing rooms. It was put in a place that was told, here you go, guys, you're having these 2 matches. And they have very much old school thinking towards women's rugby, old school thinking towards Connacht rugby. And whilst the world is coming out and condemning them regarding the female aspect of this, we should also highlight the fact that there is this attitude amongst some of the old school in the East regarding Connacht. And I don't think that should be overlooked either.
No, it shouldn't. But I think it's up to the Connacht players on the field and the Connacht coaching team to make sure that our teams are competitive, and that's where the best place to answer that, to me.
We should point out, despite that, they went out and they were very unlucky to only get a draw out of that game. So, and they're kids. Most of them are, apart from there's 1 or 2 who are seasoned campaigners, but most of that team is under 21. And I thought given everything that happened, I thought they put in a good performance before I knew what they'd been through. So I think we should praise them even to the height they went out despite everything and got a very credible draw against what must be said is a pretty powerful Ulster team.
Yeah, and one thing one organisation we have to thank is TG Cahir, because they put them on live, and it's great to see them putting the women's game and putting it up there and making it live, so as that everyone gets a chance to watch the women playing at that level. Okay, William, anything else there on the women's side of things?
Yeah, well, I watched all of the games because I was covering them for Galway Bay, either live in Galway or off television. And I feel a bit sorry for Munster, who were clearly the best team. And Connacht gave them their hardest game in Cork. They, both Leinster and Munster give Ulster a thumping. They improved dramatically last weekend. Quite a controversial game, but could be here all night talking about that. But the thing was, I felt sorry for Munster because that got lost. They won the tournament. They played 3-1-3. And I agree with Dave. I think Connacht showed a lot of good stuff at times, particularly in defence. And that's the hardest thing, to keep doing it. And they never dropped their heads. And then when you realise what had gone on before, it took a whole, it gave that game a whole different meaning. So maybe next season these games can be played. Hopefully Ireland are going to the Women's Rugby World Cup. So let's use these games as warm-up games. Let's play them a bit earlier in the season. And, it would help develop younger players if they had the international players in your own side, but also playing against them. You learn from what the other team does. It might be very tough if you were playing against, say, a Leinster side that had all their international Irish players, but you learn from that. But hopefully this debacle it's still the outflow from it is still going on. This has really hit home now. You've had Kelly Harrington, Leona Maguire, Afric Kyo, Fiona Murta, winning medals, doing really well. Women's sport, but you can't turn around then and excuse anything that happened last weekend. There's no excuse for it. And they've put their hands up, and they've just got to make sure it doesn't happen again. Here's an idea for them. I won't charge them. I'm not a consultant. The next time they do a double header, play a double header next season in the Interpros, put it in the Aviva and open the gates and say it's free of charge. Come in and get as many people in there as you can. That's the least they can manage. It's the National Stadium. They own it.
Right. I think we've covered the women's game there for the moment. As the season goes on, we're going to have some dedicated women's podcast on the women's game during the international windows. More about that anon. But let's talk about the URC and who's sponsoring it. And there was something out this week that one of the countries is going to have a separate sponsor to everybody else. Dave, what's happening there?
Yeah, it's a very, very strange situation. So the mail came out, and it was from URC, and it was about Vodacom. So Vodacom have come on board as a title sponsor, but they've only come on as a title sponsor in South Africa. So I don't know what that means in terms of the whole sponsorship, because it's still the URC in the north. It's not sponsored by Jim's, shoes or anything like that. There is no sponsorship. Well, it's now the URC, it's the Vodacom URC Championship, but only in South Africa. I don't know how that works. Why are you only sponsoring effectively, 25% of it? I'm slightly baffled by what's going on. I've never ever heard of a tournament having two title sponsors before, depending on which country it's in. It's either, or you come up with a neutral title. So it's just very, very strange development.
Well, I think Vodacom only work in South Africa. They're a top South African brand. They've obviously wanted to become attached to this. It's very hard to get international brands to sponsor stuff. When Guinness were heavily involved, they've moved away now because alcohol sponsorship in sport is going to be banned sometime in the next couple of years in Europe. And they wouldn't be a massive brand in South Africa, although you can get Guinness down there. It's just undrinkable. But it is slightly odd, and it's slightly concerning that there is no title sponsor in place a week out from the tournament. And EPCR have had this problem as well, that Heineken disappeared, and we had all sorts of additional sponsors around the EPCR tournaments. And then Heineken are back, but they're not back quite as much as they were. It's a very complex one. Another big announcement this week was the fact that there is going to be URC TV, which is another slightly interesting situation, because it's not going to be available in the UK, Northern Ireland, or Italy, but it will be available in the Republic of Ireland and the rest of the world, except South Africa and possibly some other areas that'll have to be determined. But this is the fact that you'll be able to pay to watch an individual match. You'll be able to have a monthly subscription, a yearly subscription, or a team subscription, as I understand it. But it's funny that the biggest marketplace, which is the UK, which has a population of 65 million, is not available for that because it's on a satellite television channel, which is also available in the Republic of Ireland. And a lot of it is on free-to-air television, here RTE, TG Cahir. It's a slightly confused TV deal again, and people are going to take a while to get into this, but I think it's interesting that they have taken the plunge on a streaming system, albeit one that doesn't cover the biggest markets.
Well, it does cover America, apparently. There's a tweet in here from Neil Heenahan who's asked a question. He says, are URC actually not trying to sell it properly abroad, because the paywall for URC.tv in the US will be $140. Now, in the US, they can watch the Champions Cup and Premiership Rugby on a thing called Peacock. I don't know what Peacock is, for $6 a month.
It's NBC.
NBC, $6 a month. So,
yeah,
wow. Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and it does seem as somewhat expensive. And I had a look at that, and I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll log into that because we'll be able to do some more detailed stats. But then I looked at the price and went, wow, I'm not paying that. This is way over the top.
Well, I think $140 for America is pretty good value. you'd be paying a hell of a lot more over there if you wanted Major League Baseball or.
No, but he compared it to the Champions Cup and the Premier Rugby, $6.
Yeah, well, that's a tricky one. The Champions Cup, I suppose, was less games.
Yeah.
But it's a market that is still working itself out.
Yeah.
But it will be interesting to see who is announced as a title sponsor. It's going to be interesting if next Friday night it kicks off and we don't have a title sponsor.
Yeah, Lindy, what are your thoughts? Do you think this is an issue for them, or is it just something that's just been there forever, really, isn't it?
I think possibly they couldn't get a title sponsor that included. It's much easier, obviously, to get a title sponsor that's in the Northern Hemisphere for the teams that are playing from the Northern Hemisphere. So I think it was a way of bringing in the South Africans and getting some money. And obviously, I think Vodacom sponsor the Bulls as well, don't they? So I would assume they're just going to split it in two, and they're going to be the title sponsors for the South African team, so to speak. And possibly they haven't yet got one up in the Northern Hemisphere. I think I think it's just a way of getting a sponsor to be able to bring the South Africans in.
Yeah, maybe that's where the Rock Nation's coming in with this whole OTT, over the top presentation of sports, because it's not other sports necessarily that are the biggest competitors in this world. Esports is a massive competitor, competitor to live sport and sports like rugby. So there's and online, and how young people like Danny would be the youngest of us anyway, and he'd be I'm not going to call you that young, but he'd be more inclined to watch a tablet or a phone as quickly as you would a TV at this stage, and certainly the generation coming behind you tend not to watch as much TV.
Nope. One of the reasons is and when I did see that the Urc TV, I wasn't actually very surprised, just purely because I did think that this is way a lot of things are going now, purely because people just want to watch what they want to watch. It's not a case of you turn on your TV, you've got 150 channels, but is there anything on that you want to watch, or is it you're just flicking through channels? I think that's kind of coming to the end. Maybe not with my generation, but certainly the one behind me. You mentioned esports. You look at, I see all these streamers on YouTube or Twitch or anything like that, and people are throwing, say, £5 at them every month, so they can watch them play games or just enjoy what entertainment they're doing. But it's a specific thing. It's that they're watching something that they're getting on a regular basis, rather than turning on RT. It's what's on RT, so that's where I think the whole subscription thing is going. Definitely the whole thing about watching on your phone or tablet, it's just about watching the games now. For us, it doesn't matter whether it's this big screen or anything like that. A lot of people tend to be on the move. Say you could be on the bus or you're on a train or something like that. You can whip out your phone, and the screens on phones are so good that if you hold it a certain distance away, it's like watching a TV. The technology is making it easier for people to watch stuff on the go. So you don't necessarily have to go down the old school way of sitting down on a couch, sitting in a sitting room, watching a TV with a TV subscription. So I think it's going the other way, where it's going to break down and people are going to start giving these smaller, more refined things.
Okay, all right. And that's all about the fan engagement and how fans engage with the sport, and as you say, being on the move, being able to keep up with it. I love being able to, there's certain teams I follow in other sports, and just getting Twitter updates or whatever of when a score has happened, and you're able to look at it 3 minutes later. I don't care, I'm not seeing it live. I want to see the score, whatever that score was, and going after it. I think basketball in the States has been very, very successful along that side of things. So I think there's going to be more of that as the season goes on. So that's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, the real challenge as well then for sports organisations is getting fans into stadiums, and they're still winning that battle, but they are thinking 10 years down the road. Will it still be the norm to go and watch your team, or do you just watch it remotely? That's
and the flip side of that is that they're building stadiums for esports. they're literally building stadiums for people to go and sit and watch people playing video games. So, how do you balance that out? Where, it's a very strange scenario.
I don't think that's going to change, if I'm honest, because I guess one of the closest things is that is actually when you're sitting at home, you are watching a game. Yes, you can be on Twitter and you're texting back and forth to your mates, but there's still something about being there live and talking to your mates in person. That hasn't gone away. I don't think that's disappearing either. Like they're saying, is that they're building stadiums for esports. There is still something about being in a crowd, that social interaction, that I still think is very predominant. So I don't think it's going to be a case of that they're going to be fighting to get people in. I just don't see that dying, as long as you've got your hardcore fans. And if they're going down this specific subscription route, I really can't see that dying, because people are going to, maybe not everyone will be going to every single game, but people will be going to games. So it might be changing, rather than just a hardcore, you get more sporadic fans.
All right.
South Africa will be the real challenge for that, because they are moving to a post-attendance fan base down there, and this is going to be massive. I mean, nobody turned up to watch the Cheetahs or the Kings. There are bigger crowds. The Test matches, yes, they're sold out, but some of the attendances for Currie Cup rugby in South Africa are appalling. And it'll be really a big challenge to see how the URC, if they don't sell this product correctly, people will still support the Bulls or the Stormers, but they'll be inclined to go, yeah, they're playing the Scarlets. Who are they? Watch that at home. Have a few beers, put a few steaks on. It's just, I'm going to be fascinated to see how that works, because I think it's really a challenge it's a challenge for the people who run rugby, URC, but it's also a challenge for the individual. They don't like to be called franchises, but effectively they're all these teams are franchises. They're all businesses. And how they do that, and this is this season, but they have to be thinking ahead and ahead and ahead, because old fellas like me will eventually stop going, because we're too decrepit and we can't go. But how do you bring in people behind us to replace me?
Yeah, I think that one is one that's going to run and run, and I'm assuming the likes of Rock Nation are part of that, trying to generate enough interest. And maybe, Linley, part of it is, from a Connacht perspective, is that not much is going to happen here until they improve the ground, until they actually put a proper stand in, and they make it a venue, and they're making an event, somewhere where it's a place to go and you have to be there, because, where else would you be on a Friday night in Galway except in the sports ground?
Well, obviously, those facilities are obviously there to make the stadium more attractive to punters to come and to make it an experience and make it an evening out. But at the same time, I don't think Connacht are ever going to lose their core base of supporters. I really don't. I think that appetite is there. I think it was shown last weekend, with the London Irish match, that the appetite is still there. And I think that's one of the positives, I think, going into the season after, nearly 2 years of 18 months of having, no supporters. Connacht is one of the teams that love their supporters, that thrive on their supporters. And I think it's just going to be great to see. And when I say supporters, I mean the true supporters. I mean, the families, the kids that are going there, the people who are going to engage with the team, who are going to, play every move alongside the team. These are the real rock hard supporters that Connacht loves. And I don't see that changing. Well, I certainly hope not.
I fully agree. I have to say it was wonderful to be in the sports ground last week, and apologies to all our supporters for not getting the podcast out last week. A technical issue and just a sheer piece of stupidity on my part. I lost the recording, but it was wonderful to be back in the sports ground last week. I think you said in the podcast that the best player of the day were the fans, having the fans back in, and the noise they generated, and the support that they provided, and it certainly got to me in the press box, and I was jumping around a little bit too in the early parts of the game, because it was just so wonderful to be in the ground where people were cheering and shouting and roaring. I agree. I think we won't lose too many of those Connacht fans, and we'll keep them going. Okay, Danny's going to have to run off, but just before he goes, I just want to we've got a number of new players in. I think it's 5 new players in. Give me a little bit of info on each one of them there, Dan.
Okay, so we'll start off with Mack Hansen. He played fullback for Australia under-20s in the 2018 Rugby World Cup. You've got Shane Bolton. He's currently the fastest player in the squad in the preseason. Greg McGrath, he's the 6th former Lansdowne player in our squad. Sammy Elo played number 8 up to senior schools cup level and then moved to Loosehead before making 5 appearances for Ireland under-20s at Tighthead. And Leva Fafita, who worked as a translator for 3 years in Japan before taking up rugby professionally.
I love that last one. I nearly fell off the chair when I came across that one myself, and I thought, wow, there's a guy we have to interview, because how do you end up playing rugby for Connacht when you've been a translator in a I think it was a concrete factory in Japan for 3 years? So it's over to you, William, on that one. I'm looking forward to your conversations with him on that.
Yeah, that's different. He's going to be fascinating. We haven't seen him yet. We haven't seen Mack Hansen either.
I'm still worried about our lack of cover out half. Danny mentioned Mack Hansen as a fullback, but like I had the impression we were picking up possibly an out half, but like we only have 2 out halves.
I think it's a tricky one. I mean, Tom Daly can go in there to push.
It's true.
And I think they would go down there. Mack Hansen fascinates me a little bit. I mean, tomorrow he's playing on the wing. Now, I would have suggested when he came here that he was going to be an out half. Well, I would have thought no finer opportunity than in a development interpro behind closed doors to say to him, right, we're gonna have you. Now he could change. I mean, might be moved after 20 minutes. He could be moved after half time, and
we'll never know because there's no coverage in the game.
No, I'll ask Alan. But the thing is,
I never thought he was an out half. I always thought he was a winger or fullback.
Yeah, but you see,
in school he was an out half, and he won. He brought his school to the final of whatever thing was on, totally, off his own back. Apparently, it was all about how well he was playing at out half.
Yeah, but it's out half at professional levels are different. They're very rare. They're like quarterbacks in American football. They're expensive. They're difficult to get to the right level. But it is a concern, and now that you've brought it up, it's inevitable that we will get a couple of injuries there. But I think,
you're hardly going to put Mack Hansen straight into out half.
No, you put Tom Daly in first. I would have thought,
but you're not going to put him in for the Eagles either. His first start ever for Connacht, and put him in out half when he hasn't played. It's obvious that he's a possibility then, but I think it's going to be one of those possibilities that might take a little bit of time. Let him get settled into Connacht first, and maybe we'll see. I don't know.
And my other worry of lack of cover is at Loosehead, because there's no way Dennis Buckley's going to be back before the end of the year. We'll be lucky to get him back by March if the injury is as bad as it appears. And we've got a 23 and 24-year-olds, 2 23 and 24-year-olds starting Looseheads. That's a heck of an ask.
It's a big ask. They're still searching.
We don't have somebody bankrolling the ability to go and sign a former World Cup winner, out of the blue and just boom, like Ulster have done this week, and it could be a serious problem.
Potentially it's a huge problem. I think they'll have to find somebody, and very quickly. The 2 isn't going to do it for you. It's just not doable. So Dennis Buckley, apparently his rehab's going very well, but it's a planned out rehab, and you can't really speed it up. And I suppose if I damaged my cruciate ligament, they would get it to a certain level and say, right, get on with it. Professional sportsman has to get that back to as close to perfect as possible. So as the rehab goes on, it slows down because there's less and less improvement, but they have to slog away at it. He's probably in there. He is in there. He'll be in there every day, probably on his own, just working away. If there's any other injured players, might see if we can get him to have a chat with us. I'd say it's tedium and very, very hard work. But that's why you get to be a professional sports person, because they're kind of wired a bit differently to the rest of us. And we wish him well, and we want to see him back. And what happened to him was a disgrace in that game. And that's something that World Rugby needs to sort out, is that nonsense at the breakdown where a player can get injured in that way.
Yeah, I think they have brought a law in where they're not, players are not allowed to target the lower limbs. The jackler's not allowed to be targeted. I don't know if it's been brought in for the URC, but I know they were trialling it during the summer, during the internationals. So hopefully that's brought in. So the only thing we'll just quickly mention as we come to the end of the pod, Champions Cup. We get to go back to Welford Road. I was gutted last year when I couldn't get back to one of the citadels of English rugby, and we're going to get there this season, which I'm delighted about. And we're also going to get back the chance to go back to Paris. Not quite the U Arena, but hey, Paris. Looking forward to meeting Kieran. I think Kieran's going to have to build a huge extension for all the people who want to hang out in his place. Kieran McNamara over there. So looking forward to that.
He could borrow one of those tents that the women were forced to use last week and put it out in his garden.
I'm sure the middle of January it'll be lovely.
Yeah, middle of January. Well, January to Paris, and we don't know the exact details. We know the weekend. We're just waiting. And similarly, Leicester. The week
Leicester
before
is
Christmas.
That is. I'm sorry, my Christmas starts that weekend. I mean, I'm going to that game. I don't care. I know technically I'm meant to be at work on the Monday, but I'll come to an arrangement. So that would be a great way to start Christmas, because then we don't have a home game until New Year's Day.
Yeah, and some of us will have to go to Belfast on St. Stephen's Day.
It'll be pleasant.
Indeed.
Word for it. It'll be the third time we've done it, so I'm used to it now.
So looking at the squad sizes, from what I can see, Leinster have 45 or 46 players, Ulster have 46, Munster have 48, we have 43. Now, something seems slightly wrong there. Maybe I'm missing something, but that's the official. If you look at the way they've been set out so far, like there has to be room initially for another prop. We must be able to pick up another prop on that front, because at least get us to 44. And also our academy isn't as big as some of the others. Now I know a lot of their players have come up through the academy. I know Munster signed an awful lot of their academy players. Got signed up to the senior squad last season, as did Leinster, which is great to see that the academies are working. And Connacht obviously have a decent academy, if a bit smaller. But there has to be more. There has to be something more to help Connacht be competitive, because it doesn't look as though we're going to qualify for the Champions Cup next season.
I think the problem is that, well, Niall already said earlier on, only Leinster have filled their academy spaces, which does suggest that there may be a shortage of players that are actually at the required level to come into an academy, or who want to come into an academy. And I mean, Leinster will probably finish up using about 57 players, some of which you've never heard of. But I think Connacht will have to work with what they have. So, 44 is tight, because if you're trying to get for example, next Friday when we go to Cardiff, they're playing Ulster at the High Performance Centre. So you're going to have 25, 26 players going to Cardiff, 25 minimum. You've then got to get a similar number going to the High Performance Centre. And you've still got a player like Bundy is not available. He was at the Ireland training camp today. There was a one-day camp. There's a couple of players. Caelan Blade, we don't think is available for next week either. He's still carrying a knock, even though he went to this camp today, which must have been a no contact. More of a meeting, I'd say, than anything else. There was 50 players added, 6 Connacht players were there. So they are running on a bit of a bare bones. It seems a lot of players when you go, 40, 43, maybe a drop added 44. But, it's these squads are immeasurably sort of bigger. There's people around, but Connacht are on the fumes a bit.
They certainly are. Okay, so let's bring our podcast to a close. Where are Connacht going to finish this year? Of course, there's 2 tables, isn't there? There's the Interpro table, as I call it, even though it's our fixtures again. It's the total of all the games that they play, but effectively an Interpro table, and then the actual table. So, what do you reckon, Dave? Where are Connacht going to finish?
I'm still not sure if the South Africans are as good as we think they are. But if they are, maybe I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to say 7 behind 3 of the South African teams, the other 3 Irish provinces, and possibly the Scarlets. But we could easily finish 2nd, or we could finish 15th. It's so hard to tell. But I'm going to be optimistic, say 7th, and we'll get the last place, because I think the Scottish Italian teams will finish behind us, and we'll get the last place.
Okay, Lindy, that's a positive start. Or are you as positive?
I'll tell you that after the first match and see how they play. I'm not necessarily positive at the moment. Look, in the sense that from what I've seen from the preseason games, there's certainly not the finished article. There's a hell of a lot of work to be done. Whether they're going to be ready for that, next weekend, one certainly hopes so. I come back to me after I've seen the first couple of games, and I might have a better idea, because literally we've got new players in. I haven't seen them how they're playing this yet. Andy Friend talks about his new motto, which is the fast and the relentless and the other word which I can't remember. But that's the way he wants to play a game. Up against the bigger South African sides, it can work and it may not work. It depends on it all depends on the way that the game is played and the way that the South Africans want to play the game. Look, we've done well in the past. I can see exactly where you're coming from with your 7th place, Dave, but I just want to see how these South Africans fare in a couple of the rounds and what their attitude is to this tournament, because literally we've never had these super teams coming up here, and I really want to see what they're like, how they treat it. They are let's face it, they're very, very big, but then again, New Zealanders seem to be able to cope with them, playing fast games. All I have to say about Connacht is it's all very well to have that motto, but I want to add one more word to that motto, and that is accuracy.
Accuracy indeed. William, your thoughts on where we'll finish?
Yeah, I think a lot does depend on the South Africans. I think they'll take this tournament very seriously. I think they'll get better because their internationals will come back. I think the time to play them is now. I think they will admit that their strength in depth down there is not what you would think it would be.
And that's, of course, because they have about 250 guys playing all over Europe. And
yes, that's the biggest problem they have. They've players all everywhere. But when the bottom line is for the South African players to get picked to play in the Rugby Championship and get ready for the November internationals and stuff like this is the tournament they have to play in. They've signed up to this. Now, it's still a hard sell down there, but that's what they've gone for. I think we're going to struggle in the Interpros again. And I think because that's a third of your season, I have a suspicion that Connacht will not finish in the Champions Cup place next season. I think Ulster, Munster and Leinster will win more games. I think it's going to be a really difficult ask to get up in the Interpro part of the tournament. And the start again is just, I know it's a start every season, but if you come out of this start 1-2, lose 3, you just about get away with that. If it's any worse than that and you're having to chase, it'll get very tricky. And I think it's a new coaching ticket. It's a new structure with players. Big challenge. I think it's going to be a really, really tough year. I hope I'm wrong. I think it'll be a fascinating year, but I think it's going to be a toughie.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go against you. I'm going to go with the fact that we have so many home games that the fans are going to get in behind us. They're going to have really inspired the players. You're going to have the cussedness that Mossy and Collie Tucker will bring. You're going to have Deval Senecal fixing a lot of our line-out issues, which they did for a lot of the time last week against London Irish, and I think we're going to win a few more games than we've lost. And the belief that the players picked up with their 3 away wins against the 3 provinces, the other provinces last season, is going to give them a little bit more. And I'm going to be very positive and say, yeah, we're going to have a cracking season, and I can't wait for it. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed that. Looking forward to getting back into a routine now over the next 4 or 5 weeks of midweek podcasts. And There's going to be a big change in the Craggy Rugby podcast world, because we're going to put some of these podcasts behind the paywall. The match day one is going to stay free to everybody. That'll be on our normal stream. But if you want to listen to the ramblings of the Craggy Crew and get all the details of, you know, what's going on in Connacht Rugby, but if you want to get the detail that we bring, you can catch us on patreon.com/Craggy Rugby. We have 2 tiers. You've got the club tier, where you get the midweek podcast, you'll get the coaches interview before a game. I think we're the only people who do that. The reasoning behind the teams that they've picked before the team, just after the teams have been picked. And then we've an executive club tier where you'll actually get to talk to us. We're gonna set up a chance for people to actually have live chats with us. We're just trying to engage a bit more with you guys and trying to bring as much of Connacht Rugby as we can out there. And in order to do that, we need a wee bit more money. So hopefully you'll support us and keep supporting us. And thanks to everyone who has supported us through the years. And hopefully you'll stay on board. And this change kicks in on our Patreon site from the 1st of October. So from October 1st, we go behind the paywall. But up to then, anything we do will be free. So you'll get an idea of what we do. And maybe you'll feel you want to help us along. Thanks, folks.
Loose, cut it loose. Break out or nothing changes.